Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Dice Tower. Well, at the table, specifically on the Dice Tower, I'm Tom Vassell.
Hi there, I'm Eric Summerer, and our guest at the table today is the artist behind such titles as Everdale, Tapestry, Mission Red Planet, and Citadels. He's also a husband, father of 5, and the mastermind behind the Smoking Bones saga. Everybody, please welcome Andrew Bosley. Hello, Andrew.
Hey, guys. Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
I am very excited to talk to you. We're going to talk about creation of art for board games. We're going to talk about your writing of your universe. We're going to talk about your journey into board gaming. But first, Tom, you have some bookkeeping to take care of, some announcements to make.
Dice Tower East, folks, is live. You can go to dicetowereast.com and you can... I'm doing that wrong.
Sign up to go.
Sign up to go there. Also, Dice Tower Cruise, you can start getting your tickets. Open to the general public. So dicetowercruise.com, dicetowereast.com. Now's the time to make those plans, folks. Summer is coming. There is just over 200 tickets left to Dice Tower East, so don't delay. The library gets better on a daily basis. I just added 3 games before this video started. I also took a game out, but it's the same game. I'll talk about that later.
What?
It's just a new edition of an old game. That's all.
I see.
It's
and that's
not
another topic we're going to talk about in just a little bit as well.
Well, this one is done by the greatest artist of all time. Never mind.
It's okay.
All right, so let's begin, Andrew, with some geographical data.
Sure.
Where are you right now? Where did you grow up?
All right. I live in Arizona, northern Arizona, a town called Prescott, and I've been here for about 9 years, almost 10 years now, and I grew up in Southern California, a little town called Costa Mesa in Orange County, and grew up there, went to school in Northern California, and then all around for different work, but ended up here in northern, beautiful Arizona.
Did you go to school specifically for art, or were you studying something else?
Yes, I did. I knew kind of always wanted to be working in art, so I went to a public state school up in San Jose State, which had a really fantastic program. Well, not an art school, but I was studying illustration and animation while I was there.
So looking back, do you have an early gaming memory? When did you? What's the earliest thing you can remember in the gaming world?
In the gaming world, we played a lot of games when I was a kid, but back then, of course, it was Uno and chess, and which are all still fantastic. But I think Uno was my first gaming memory. Playing that like in the back of an RV or something going camping with my family or something like that. Uno was big.
Now, did you play Uno correctly, or did you play by this newfangled method on which things stack?
No, we played it the old way. I mean, yeah, we didn't do the stacking.
My kids played a stacking thing. It turns into insanity after a while. It's like draw four. I'm like, okay, someone's getting 12 cards.
Yeah, my kids like to play it that way, but they're wrong.
I think it's the youth of today.
Yeah,
this is one of the society's problems. Kids playing Uno incorrectly.
I don't think it's brought up, in society discussions enough that's really Uno.
I always
agree.
played growing up that you never. I think the official rule is that if you can't play, you draw one card and then the turn passes. But we had played that you keep drawing until you can play. So I'd end up with like a string of cards down my arm. Until I finally drew something I could play, which I guess isn't the real rule.
Did your sadistic brother teach you this?
It's entirely possible. I think my parents taught me how to play.
This is why families should have one child.
Dang it.
That's one way to do it.
We've missed the boat on this one. I was talking to my kids this morning. I said, I'm so excited your sisters are coming in for the holidays, and they were less thrilled than I was. Well, what do you do?
They've been ruling the roost for so long. They're like, wait.
That's right. It's about to get shoved aside.
So, Andrew, when did these two passions converge? You went to school for art. You played board games. When did designing art for board games come into play?
It's really more recent. I mean, it's so crazy because I really love that I'm here, but I was doing board games and I was making board games when I was in high school and junior high. I was playing plenty of stuff. I didn't fully know about like modern gaming until like college time, and I was introduced to Settlers of Catan, and then that just kind of blossomed from there. But I was playing games and doing art, but they were always separate until really Everdale. I mean, I worked on Mission Red Planet was my first board game that I did artwork for. So I mean, that would be the start of it, but it was at the time still like this isolated job while I was doing concept art for video games. And so someone just I had done work for Fantasy Flight Games, doing some fantasy illustration for them on the side, but my career was in video games for a long time previous to that, and so this was just an opportunity that came along, and it was neat, and I thought it was really cool, and I was like, oh wow, this is kind of the world I've enjoyed for so long, but it wasn't something that I felt like was part of my career until Everdale.
Your name is on Blood Bowl Team Manager. What did you do for that?
That is the funniest credit that pops up. I think it was for Fantasy Flight, or I don't remember who the publisher, but
it was Fantasy Flight.
Okay, I did a couple rat football players back in the day, like a couple pieces of card art. It wasn't my best time, but it's there, and it's like it always shows up. It seems to be like the top of the list. Like, this is what Andrew did. Is Blood
Well, it's
Bowl.
alphabetically the first one.
Right.
There we go. I wasn't thinking about it. Alphabetically makes sense. I do need to find something earlier in the alphabet to replace it soon, if I can.
So a couple of like side projects, basically, with Blood Bowl and occasional work over there. When did like tackling an entire world like Everdale come into play?
It really was Everdale. That was the start. I mean, I had been working on stuff for my own projects, things that I had ideas for, as far as world building type of things, projects of my own. But as far as bringing that into the board game industry, was definitely Everdale. That was it was so close to. I mean, it was so close to not happening. There were lots of things happening at that time, and it was. I'm so grateful that was a turning point. I could have just gone straight forward with what I was doing and at the time, but there was just this one moment where there was this opportunity to take this job or take this job, and Everdale was the one that I picked, and they were just so awesome. They let me they put a lot of trust in me and let me kind of run with the visuals the way I wanted to. Graphic design was done by the art director Dan May, who did a fantastic job. But as far as like telling the story of the world, that was something that let me kind of just run.
So is there something about designing art for tabletop games versus doing the concept art for video games that drew you toward one versus the other?
Well, I mean, I didn't know anything about board games when I was in college, and it still is not something that people talk about. Like, I mean, we all know how little the general public often, when you're not talking to people who know this world, this industry well, like they just think Monopoly and Battleship. I was in that same boat. I didn't know about board game stuff when I was in college. So I was preparing to go towards feature animation, visual development, concept art, and video games was the opportunity that provided itself at the time. And so I went that direction. That seemed, I mean, it was definitely what I wanted to do at the time. But there's definitely a different, it's a different beast completely. I mean, there's an overlap. I mean, I'm drawing and I'm painting, but for concept art, you're pushing out as many ideas as you can, and all of them except for one, sometimes all of them, are thrown away. And then, but in board game art, you're obviously working with a bigger picture in mind, and there's not that luxury of throwing a bunch of art away. It's true illustration, where concept art is more idea generation. So it's very different. I loved it, but I love both, and I brought a lot of the concept art mentality and philosophy, principles into the work I do in board games. But it's a very different type of work.
Would you, were you surprised at the success of Everdale? Because that one is, one of those phenomenal hits.
I was, yeah. I mean, I had a blast. I don't think even at the time I was thinking, I definitely at the time was not thinking, okay, I have a new direction in my career that I'm going in. I think at the time I probably did consider it like Mission Red Planet or Citadels. Like, this is just a cool job, a really, really cool job. But I need to find the next concept art job. And so when it did really, really well, I was really, really excited for the opportunity to continue down that path.
Do you have like an Everdale section of your life now? I mean, with the number of expansions and cards, I mean, do you know, like off the top of your head, how many different Everdale pieces of artwork you've done?
I know it's over 200. I actually have a document that I pulled that I have that I made at one point that has every piece of artwork I did for Everdale on it, divided by the expansions. I can't remember the exact count, but it's either close to or past 200 at this point.
We've been dancing around it. It's a lot. We've been dancing around your process, and which is something I really want to get into here. So you've been hired for this job. You're taking an entire board game with 100-something cards and a board and a cover.
Mm-hmm.
How do you approach the project? How much do you know about the gameplay? What is the client asking for? How much are you deciding versus what they want? How does it all start?
I think the process has evolved a little bit over time. When I first started on Everdale, it was a lot more, and I'm grateful that it was this way, a lot more formal, like everything was in place for me to just create artwork. The layouts had already been designed, so graphic design was already there. I knew what the shape of the board was going to be before I touched it at all. I knew the cover wasn't there, but there was a lot of stuff that was already figured out ahead of time, and I just needed to come in and take a look at it, and fill the space. Basically, here's a card, put your artwork there.
Who was the graphic designer you were working with at the time?
That was Dan May.
Okay, yeah, I think he's one of the best in the business.
He is. And I'm grateful. We've become very good friends over the years, and we continue to work together on different projects, which is awesome. But yeah, so that was kind of, a lot of stuff was already set in place before I started. Not so much some of the world, but not much. But just layout and technical stuff. But then as I've gone into more games, I found that it's less common for a lot of that stuff to be solved ahead of time. So what we would call in other industries, and we just don't talk about that much here on board games at the moment, is, there was an art direction kind of already figured out for Everdale, a minimal level of that, but in many of the projects I work on now, there's none. And so, because I'll be working with first-time publishers, first-time designers many times, and so they're just going, I've got a really cool game, can you put artwork on it? And so one of the first things I try to do, if we have the time to do it, is sit down and look at the entire game. We know we're going to have these cards. We know we're going to have a central board. We're going to have these components in play, and I'll try to take a look at all those sort of things and do some rough ideas of what the game will look like as a whole. And then that obviously takes a lot of legwork out of the individual figuring those things out, as opposed to going, okay, there's these types of cards over here. I start working on illustrations, and they all look fine as illustrations by themselves. But if I don't start with the whole big picture in mind, when I then move to the next component, something might look, it's not as purposeful. I don't know if that makes sense. So the process of the illustration itself is pretty simple and pretty standard I have a way I do things. But when it comes to actually working on the project and the process of getting that artwork done for any particular project, I try to start now with a bigger picture, look at all the components at once. And I think that started with Tapestry. Tapestry, I had the privilege of doing all the graphic design, all the art direction for Tapestry, and so I spent about a month just concepting with Jamie Stegmeyer, just ideas of the way the whole game could be laid out. How would certain mats go together, or what would be the color choices, the color schemes for the whole game, so it doesn't look accidental at the end. It looks purposeful throughout. And that nowadays that's not built into my process completely yet, because it's not something my clients go, hey, I need you to spend some time doing this. And so I often will have to go, okay, I'm really probably the main person or only person thinking about the visuals for a game at this point. So I need to make sure we don't go too far without thinking about the big art direction, the big picture. And so that's kind of the process. And as far as other things, I get my clients will often have art briefs of I can't know the game as well as they do by the time I start. So, in the case of Everdale, I'll get okay, we have a card here. It's going to be the castle. And it's associated with the king. So we need to make sure that there's a relation between these two things, and there's maybe a one-sentence brief that says, hey, this is going to be in the forest, and it's, maybe it's the trunk of a tree or something. Can you work with that? And then I'll do some sketches and then run forward with that.
Bonnie asks a question in the chat. Do you get to play the games as part of the process for making the art for the game?
I do often. I don't. Obviously, I'm not part of the development team, so I'll usually get to play it maybe once, or watch others play it. These days I tend to not play. I prefer to watch others play. One, because I just look like an idiot when I'm horrible at the game around everybody else who's been playing it much longer. But I like the chance to just see what other people are doing. So I usually get a chance to see the game working by the time I start, usually, or at least close to it.
Well, so I'm going to bring in a question that someone asked, because I like to talk about this a little bit, about the inspirations. Let's talk about Everdale a little bit. Someone earlier in the chat asked about Red Wall books, and did you have any inspiration? Because anthropomorphic animals are fairly popular now, mostly thanks to Everdale. In the board gaming world, but there's a lot of different books and things like that. Did you draw inspiration from any of that?
For sure. I think some of my earliest, not my earliest art that I was doing, but when some of the really influential stuff were early anthropomorphic media. I read the Red Wall series, a lot of the books in the Red Wall series when I was a teenager. I was hugely influenced by early animation, earlier animation from when I was younger. Things like The Secret of Nim, which is mice, on a farm.
That's right.
An American Tale, more mice and other animals. Land Before Time. A lot of Don Bluth, who was a great animator and director. Who did a lot of stuff in that. But that was, when I'd go to the movies and then I'd come home and I'd be drawing those things that I was watching. So between Red Wall and like An American Tale and those sort of things, I was drawing mice with swords and otter wizards, when I was a kid all the time. So when Everdale came along, it was like the coolest thing in the world to me. So I not many people know this, but they approached me for the job, and I was on board. I was deciding between a couple things that were, which job I was going to take for this period of time, and I wanted it to be Everdale, and I hadn't heard back for a little while, and so I started just doing sketches of characters that I thought would fit in Everdale. and was posting them on Instagram specifically for Dan May to see. I hadn't had the job yet, but I was like, this is what I want to draw anyway, so please let me do it. I'd love it if you paid me to do it. But a lot of influences from when I was growing up, and still. So I can't think of Everdale without thinking about even the artists on the Redwall series. Like there's been several different artists that worked on the Redwall book covers, but I look at those, and that's probably the number one influence for why I paint things in Everdale the way I do.
I wonder, like, what the fascination is with this. I mean, I don't know. Like, Redwall is such a defining book in my life as a teenager. Like, I couldn't put it down. Mm-hmm. It was such a fascinating book. Why do you think people like this animal art so much over, say? I mean, because Redwall could be a human game. I mean, you'd have to change some things. Why do you think people like this? Because it's very popular right now.
Yeah. I don't know. I've looked at that and I've thought, how do I, is there a way to capture that charm, that warmth, and not have that? And you can, for sure. Of course, there are lots of other brands out there, but for me, working on Everdale, and I go, okay, is there any way I can take this, and package this and put it in something else? But I don't know. I think there's something very familiar with it. I think there's something that, whether it's from other media, books, film, whatever it is that we've seen this before in one form or another. I don't know if it's that or if it's just we're familiar with these types of animals and we like animals and we bond with our pets, obviously, and we I think there's also something about, I'm really spitballing, but not completely out of nowhere. I think there's something about human characters as well that, like, if it doesn't look like me, then maybe I can't relate to that very well. So, we can have human characters in books and movies and board games. And when we try to tell a story with those characters, sometimes if they don't seem like they're like me, then maybe I can't identify with them as well and put myself in their shoes. But a mouse, I guess it's so far different that it's like, I could be that mouse. I could be that character. And I think that there's also things with Everdale that are very classic, timeless tropes, timeless story type of things that we don't, they're not set in now, that can they're old. They feel approachable for any age, any, I think that seems a reasonable possible explanation, but I'm not sure for sure. Yeah. Totally.
I want to talk a little bit about your technical setup. You're faced with, here's a card that I have to illustrate. Are you using physical medium or is it digital? What does your setup look like?
It's all digital right now, with some extremely rare exceptions. I actually was talking to some other people today and sharing some art. I did do some traditional work, some watercolor illustrations for Everdale, for a very specific component in one expansion. But for the most part, it's all digital. So I've got a desk that I sit out for my workhorse, space for getting most of the things that I've done. I have a what's called a Wacom Cintiq, which is basically it's a 27-inch monitor, but it's pressure sensitive like an iPad, so I can paint on it. That is not where I do most of my work at this point, but it is where everything finishes here. I come to my desk, I come to my desktop computer, do find out little details, and then I'm sending my files off to my clients. But when I'm actually working, when I'm doing most of the work, 90 to 95% of the time is on an iPad. I've got an iPad Pro, and I'm working in an app called Procreate, which is a fantastic app that's very comparable to Photoshop, at least in its painting features. So I'm often usually sitting. I have another desk across from my room that I kind of is a drafting table that's kind of more like when I'm getting down and working, or I'm sitting on a couch watching TV sometimes. But that's mostly it. I'm painting there. It's mobile. I can take it with me. I do a lot of work on the go. I finish the day. I might have a little bit of time after my kids go to bed, so I'm sitting watching a show with my wife, and I'll have my iPad out and I'm working on a project. But then I bring it all the next day back to my desk and finish any last minute things I need to before it goes to my client. And that's basically it. I do a lot of traditional stuff still just for myself, but it's just not a practical. I mean, there's other fantastic artists. My favorite artist, Vincent Dutrait, is the majority.
I have not heard of this hack, but all right.
Yeah, well, I can share some of his work with you if you'd like later.
He's
decent.
Side note there, then. So what's it like working with him? This is the first such a contrast of art has not often been done in board games.
Yes.
The upcoming game that you guys are doing together. Can you talk a little bit about how that came together?
Sure. Well, tell the whole story. So it was not always going to be this way. There were some interesting schedule, practical things that headed in this direction that made it so two artists would make the most practical sense. It was not necessarily the vision for the entire game right from the get-go. But the geniuses at Fantasia Games, and I think they are all fantastic guys over there, they, because of some practical things that needed to happen, it made more sense to have two artists. I at first was like, this just doesn't work normally. I don't know if I really want to do this. I normally would turn down a job if it was divided up like that normally. But they said, well, I think we can get Vincent Dutrait to do this. And I was like, okay, I'm in. And so, and the process though is interesting. It's not, I would love to say Vincent flew from Korea to Arizona and he sits on one side of a desk and I sit on another and we're painting together and holding hands and it's just really sweet and it's just this perfect thing. It's a wonderful experience, but it's like we've divided the project in a way that makes a lot of sense thematically, but it doesn't require us to be working right in tandem all the time. So I'll work on my part of the cover. He'll work on his part of the cover. They all come together in the end, and it's a really nice look. I feel like Vincent is like a kindred spirit to me. Like we're very similar in many ways in our personalities. So it was very fun to meet him for the first time, and I hope to hang out with him more. But unfortunately, the really direct interaction was not a ton. It was something that needed to be kind of orchestrated in order to make sure the work got done in a timely manner. But
by the way, folks, we're talking about Unconscious Mind. This is an upcoming game with two artists.
And we're kind of I love that he lives in Korea. We've already talked. I'm planning to make a trip with my wife, and he's going to be my tour guide. So
nice.
when we go to Seoul, I'm looking forward to becoming better friends with Vincent.
Very cool. So there's another type of sort of separated collaboration, and that's redoing the art for an existing product. One of the questions on our Board Game Geek Guild comes from Julian, talking about Citadels specifically, but this also would apply for Mission Red Planet, doing an update of the art. How do you approach that when you're revamping somebody else's work? Do you look at the original stuff, or do you want to have it fully your perspective and do your own thing?
I certainly look at the old art, the art that was done previously. Most of my reboots, I've done quite a few of them. the first two games I worked on were both reboots, Mission Red Planet and Citadels. So early on in my career, I don't think earlier on in my board game industry career, I wish I could say that I was more knowledgeable about the other artists that were around at the time. So I knew that they were there, and I appreciated that they were great artists. But my role was to reboot this particular game, to come in with a fresh look. And so what we definitely were not going, okay, how can we apply this other artist's style? How can we, my job wasn't to like be a bridge between two new things. It was to be a new thing. So we would try to find unique ways to reference other things from the previous games as much as we could, without relying on the style that they had. I'm my own artist, and that's probably one of the hardest things to ask an artist, is to go, can you work on this, but can you do it like them? And so it's not a favorite thing. So I was excited because I didn't know Mission Red Planet when I had first started the job. I knew Citadels. I had played Citadels before I was approached about that job. And so I loved the game, and so I was excited to be able to be a part of kind of the legacy of that particular game. And so I was looking forward to taking this and kind of making it my own. But I love and appreciate a lot of these artists that I've had the chance to work with in a unique way. I've gotten a chance to meet some of them. I was in France for the International Game Festival, I think it's called, in Cannes, in early before COVID, before it hit everybody, 2020. I was there and I met Julian, who did some work for Citadels, I believe. So I've gotten to know, as I've been in the industry more, I've gotten to know more of the artists, and I won't say more, appreciate them more, because I did at the time, but just I wasn't thinking of it as as much of a collaborative thing as maybe I might now.
What does the revision process look like? How many times do you redo? I don't want to say redo, but the feedback after you send in a piece of art to the publisher. How often are you getting revision notes back? How many iterations do you usually go through before you have to lock it down?
It depends on the client. Some publishers can be very, and certain clients can be very, very picky, and then others are a little bit more trusting. I feel very, very fortunate that nowadays most of my clients are very, very trusting of me, so I don't have, the revision process is not as long as other times might be. And I think I try to create a process with my clients, especially it's like if we've got 40 cards that we've got to make, it just doesn't make sense to go, okay, here's 3 sketches for this card. What do you think about this? And we spend about a week going back and forth and figuring this stuff out. It's like, I'll illustrate 3 or 4 cards and we'll come up with a direction, and then they usually will go, okay, just run with it. And I always send a sketch to my clients for every piece of artwork that I do. Nobody says just do whatever you want. But after that stuff is sent in, it's maybe a few sketches that need to be changed, but they're usually happy to let me kind of run with it from that point. So covers, of course, take more time and more revisions, and those I always do multiple sketches and multiple different ideas. Sometimes I'll do a few different passes of color, different approaches for the color, but by the time we've gotten from the sketch phase to the color rough phase and we're ready to go to final, there's really not much that needs to be changed at that point. There might be little tiny things that change, but those are usually easy to fix by the end.
I want to point out that Eric picks these questions. This next one from Kirk, which could have been like the whole big question of the week.
I guess it could have, yeah.
Since almost everyone's talking about it at the moment, as an artist, what do you think of AI art? This feels like an entrapment question. Do you foresee artists using this as a tool or even another medium? When someone asks me this question right now, I'm like, I'm not an artist. I cannot answer because I don't know.
It's so funny. I mean, I have plenty of thoughts. Yes, this could be an entire different video if we want to. I'm not the most educated in all of this, but it's interesting. It's become very personal recently in a funny way. I think AI art is. I'm in general less inclined to like AI art. I actually did a video recently, an interview recently specifically talking about this. I think AI art at the moment does a really good job of doing, if say a piece of artwork takes 100%, from 1 to 100 of the process. I was describing earlier a sketch, a color rough, and then going to final. That sketch and color rough, the kind of planning of a piece of art is like the 50% of it that most people don't see and know what goes into it. But that's what makes, I think, in my opinion, great art great. The rest is just making it pretty. And AI does really good at making things sometimes look pretty, but other times it skips over that first part and currently does not do a very good job of it. I will be quite nervous. I am nervous sometimes that people will be okay with AI art because it might not be that good, but it's cheap, so it's fast, and so that is something that makes me nervous. But it was interesting. I actually was playing around with ChatGPT, GPT-4 recently, just for my own world building things. And my son is a writer, and I'm hiring him to work on some of my Smoking Bones stuff. And I just tested GPT out recently. I was like, okay, write this thing. And it basically was what my son is doing for me.
Oof.
And it made something really, really fast, really easy. I mean, it would require plenty of tweaking and to make it fit for what I was doing. But I was like, for a second, I was like, I don't need to pay my son anymore. And then I was like, I don't know if that's a very good thing. And so I kind of had to make a decision. Like, it became real for me. I'm sometimes frustrated with the idea that people would just go, well, I can just go to Midjourney and have someone make a piece of artwork, and it's cheaper. And I'm like, but come on, I'm a human being. Like humans will do this so much better. And then I tested this out with writing, and I was very tempted for a second to go, why don't I just do this? And my wife set me straight, and not to unemploy my son. And so I buckled down and was consistent and said, okay, no, I don't think this is a great thing. I don't know if it has its place, but I do worry that I think AI has the ability to really revolutionize so many things in the world, and in some ways that streamlining of knowledge and information and innovation is really great. But I don't know if I understand, except for the financial part of it, of why it necessarily is good to replace art with AI. But I'm biased. That's me, of course.
Yeah, that's
so
why
you mentioned.
I asked about it, because it's such an interesting topic for me, but I don't know enough about the situation that people say it's stealing from art, and maybe it is, but I don't understand the difference between that and an artist getting inspiration from another artist. But then again, I don't know enough about the subject.
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, like I was saying, this is a pretty big and complicated thing, so it's hard to narrow it down. But yes, I mean, the process is nervous to think that a computer would. I mean, you could go right now, and for very famous artists, you can say, make this art in the style of this person, and it will do it, and it'll be passable and look like it's that person's art. And I'm not famous enough that you could look up, make this in Andrew's style. I have tried it, and it doesn't work, but not yet. But that seems iffy. to me at times. If you can actually just say, here, computer, make this in the style of this person's art. And that just means that person may not have that opportunity to do that
Right.
when they would have otherwise. But so yeah, the way it gathers information, the way it gathers its knowledge about art is complex and complicated. So that's a whole other side to it that certainly has had a huge impact in the art world. I mean, within the illustrator concept art community, there's big movements going on to say, to make it very clear, you do or do not use AI art.
Right.
Not the art from the artist side. Like there's a lot of artists that are very, very passionate about this and are putting a lot of pressure on their clients, not, or just the industry in general, to say, don't use this, don't do this. That's hurting all of us. And I can understand that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of talk in the voiceover world about the same thing, because you can get a computer to read text for you, and it's getting better and better at doing so.
Yeah.
And so amongst the narrator community, it's the same thing. What is the value of human produced art versus cheap and quick?
Yeah.
And there is value in both. And it's really, what do you want to convey with the stuff you're making?
I also, at the same time, I know that technology changes things. I know a lot of people would say technology, has obviously put lots of people out of work over time as we innovate and new things happen in different industries, and that happens all over the place to everybody. So what makes art special? And it's hard to argue against that. Like, okay, this might be something that I have to deal with for sure. I'd like to think that there's something different between art and other things, but again, that's me as an artist. I can't think of it objectively.
So very quickly, I want to give you a chance to talk about Smoking Bones, which you mentioned there. This is your baby, your own creation. You're not just doing somebody else's stuff. This is your universe. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So the Smoking Bones world is something I've been working on for probably about 10 years. So long before I was working in board games. I had intentions for it to, still do, for it to be a series of books. But after I got into the board game industry and saw how much, storytelling there can be, how much of an immersive experience you can have in board games. I think I understood this beforehand. Again, until Everdale, until my art career went into board games, I'd never made the connection between these different things. So it wasn't until recently that I was like, oh, this would be really neat. But before I was hired to do Tapestry, one of my favorite games is Scythe, if not my favorite game. And I was always amazed at the relationship between Jacob Brzezowski and Jamie Stegmaier, and how that created Scythe, the artist, and then the game. And I knew how I had learned over time how respectful Jamie was of those artists. And so I actually, before I had any communication with him, I was like, I think this could be a board game, and I'd love to pitch this to Jamie. And so I did that several years back, and we've been in. I'm careful about what I'm saying, but we've been in development of a series of board games set in the Smoking Bones world, while in tandem I am developing the stories and the other supplemental material that goes with it. And so the story is basically it's a story of a travel company, the Smoking Bones Travel Company. It's not as foreboding as the name sounds. It's a tourist company that takes people to the magical places of the world, and it really just started out with I wanted to make a travel guide. I'd picked up a book at one point that was called 1,000 Places to Visit Before You Die in This World. And I was like, how cool would it be to have 1,000 magical places, 1,000 places to visit before you die? And mine was 1,000 magical places to visit before you die. And they were going to be real places in the world. Like if you're going to Scandinavia, these are the places you want to visit, these magical things. And this is the shop you want to, or the restaurant you want to go and have soup at, if you're there. And anyway, all of this sort of stuff, a comprehensive guide to going to magical places, make it feel as real as possible. And then that slowly turned into stories and then turned into games. And so it's something I'm really excited about. All the artwork back here is all artwork part of the Smoking Bones world. There's a lot more that I'm not sharing at the moment, and the process is ongoing, but it's something I'm really excited about, and excited that Jamie was very excited about, and he was on board right away. And so it's something we are working together on in that side of things, and it's really very, very hopeful that the books, the games all together will be a very seamless experience.
Will we see the two together, or will we see the game first, or the stories first?
You will see they will be coming out together. Not the book will not be a product of Stonemaier Games, but they are. The plan is for them to be related in their release.
All right, well, it's time to talk about games.
Indeed.
Yes.
So, what games, not that you've been drawing for or secretly designing, what games have you been playing lately that you've been enjoying?
Well, so there's two that have been on my mind recently. One is surprisingly, you say that ones I didn't illustrate, and I picked one that I did because I
okay, fine.
Sorry. That's cheating. I'm not trying to sell myself here, but Tapestry was one I played. I get embarrassed a lot among my fans because they'll be such passionate game players for a lot of the games that they'll work on. They'll like the art too, but they'll love the game. And Tapestry is one of those that I have not given a lot of time to until recently. And so I've been playing that a ton recently, and I've really, really enjoyed that experience. And it's funny how, you'll do the art for this and you'll only know the game so well while you're making art for it. But then now as I'm playing it together, it's having the desired effect that I was hoping it would have, but I just had not given it haven't had the bandwidth to spend a lot of time playing it until recently, and I've really, really been enjoying it. I'm excited now that we've got so many expansions. I only played the base game, hadn't played any expansions, and so I'm excited to just roll all those out as well. The other game is a game called Resist, which is it's an old. Well, it's been around for a little while, but it was re-released by 20th Century Games, and it's this solo game, story-driven solo game about these Spanish what do you call them? Freedom fighters, kind of fighting against some imperialistic powers. It's very much real based. I don't know the history very well, but the art is gorgeous, and so that drew me to it first. But until recently, I only knew of Spanish versions of it, and so I wanted to experience the whole thing. But anyway, I recently got that and I've been playing a ton of that with my kids. We'll play it together. It's beautiful, and it's kind of hitting all the points for a solo game that I would love to see a solo game be able to do, like tell a story, but also be replayable and still be interesting. And it's doing a lot of that. So that's those two have definitely been on my mind a lot.
Neat.
What about you, Eric?
So I got to play the latest iteration of the Sprawlopolis system. This is from Button Shy Games. The new one is called Naturopolis. There was Sprawlopolis and Agropolis that was farming based. This is more about nature. It's a very similar system. It's an 18-card game. You have 3 scoring cards that are laid out at the beginning, and these are how you score points. You will be collaboratively, either as a solo game or with partners, be building this map, and you're trying to consolidate certain groups of spaces and keep the roads to a minimum. The biggest change that I noticed in Naturopolis versus the other versions is that roads are more expensive in this version. In previous ones, I think you lost 1 point for each road you created. Here it's 2 because nature is very important. But really, this is just a new set of scoring opportunities. If you're a fan of these other games, it's an easy one to jump into and say, this is more. It's almost standalone expansion territory because the concepts are the same. I don't know how well you can mix them, but I think there are rules to mix these cards together into some super deluxe game. And then the other one is another newish card game that I know Tom has played. It's called Scorecards. This is from Mike Fitzgerald. And it's a very bare bones presentation where you have a deck of cards, and the cards have numbers and colors, but they also have scoring conditions on them. And you start with one card in the center of the table, and there's a 2-player version, which is the one I've played. There's also 3- and 4-player like partnerships. But in the 2-player, you'll just take turns playing cards from your hand and drawing a new card to your hand when you play it. And when you do so, you will be using the scoring condition on the card in relation to the numbers and colors that are on the table. So as more cards come out, you have more opportunities to score. So it might say, score 3 points for every 3 on the table. And if there's 3 threes, you're going to score 9 points for that card. And you write that to 9 and draw a card and move on. And when you move on to the next hand, you also don't get new cards. You have your hand of cards already that you have been cultivating throughout the round. So not only are you playing for this round, you are preparing for next round. And then you ultimately get points for either the highest total of points or the highest single score in a round, and that's it. Those are the 2 points in a hand that are dealt out. So it's a very low, eventually scoring game, but it has, for being such a simple presentation, it's got a lot of subtle machinations to it. It's interesting. I really want to play more, and I want to play the partnership, which has some very intricate passing rules that go into it. The production of this, it's like a print-on-demand company, and there are some odd decisions on that front, but the game is pretty cool. It's called Scorecards from Mike Fitzgerald.
Nice. I already mentioned a game has been upgraded tremendously. That would be Ra, as many people guess. The new version of Ra is absolutely stunning. Really, really good graphic design by Ian O'Toole, and just the whole thing looks really, really, really good. And then I want to talk about Lightspeed. Eric, have either one of you played Lightspeed?
I have not.
Lightspeed, I've talked about this in the past. It was designed by James Ernest, and it was originally from Cheap Ass Games, and it was remade in a very convoluted way from Stronghold Games. But essentially, you have 10 ships, and on the table, you put some cards that are asteroids, and they have stuff that you can mine off them. And then you say go, and you shuffle your deck of 10 ships. You turn over the top ship, and you place it on the board, on the table, anywhere you want, in real time. And these ships have lasers shooting out of them, and you're trying to make those lasers hit the asteroids so that you can mine the stuff from them, and also shoot other people's ships. And they're putting stuff down, and once you put it all down, well, once one person's finished, that's the end of the game. So, you're putting out as fast as you can. And it takes about, 45 seconds to play. Once you do that, you then spend the next 8 minutes scoring it. Because the first ship will go, and you'll get out I used to use a yardstick, and we'd measure where the shots went and see if it hits the asteroids, and you mine stuff. If it hits another ship, but ships also have like shields around them that can block it. Really fun game. But I've always found it amusing that the game was so quick and also, took so long to score. Well, I got this. Someone sent me this, and this is another AI thing. It's going to put scorekeepers out of business. It uses a program called Telegram, and I don't know much about Telegram. It's like some Twitter-esque thing. And so you put all the cards out on the table like normal, and then you take a picture of the game, and then it tells you what happens. It will show you picture by picture, generates pictures of the ships shooting each other, which ships blow each other up, and it's very accurate because we looked, because we didn't believe it. We're like, no way, that ship hits the other one, and we got, oh, that's right. And I think that's awesome. That's a really neat thing. And so now I'm putting out the call that this can be done with every game. When I'm done playing Feast for Odin, I want to go, click, what's my score?
That's pretty awesome.
I don't think anyone would argue about putting Scorekeeper out of business, although I know there's going to be some guy in the back going, kids these days should be learning to do math on their own. Thank you, Mr. Feld fan. But, I don't know. I just think it's really neat. I think it's a really cool concept.
That's one of the high points of playing on an app is that it keeps track of everything for you and does the scoring at the end. So this is a neat little stopgap. You can just take a picture and see who won, at least for games that allow that sort of thing, if it's totally based on board position at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, now they obviously each of the ships has this, weird graphic code on it. It looks like a fat barcode type thing, and I'm sure that's so it knows what ship is where.
Right.
And you have to stand on a chair, even I do, and take a good picture of the game. But I'm really fascinated by this concept, and I think there's a future there, because while definitely there could be made an argument that we don't want to throw the creative tasks to the AI, I wouldn't mind throwing them as many uncreative tasks as we can, like crunching numbers. The number of people who pull out a calculator to add up 23 points astounds me. That people should be able to do in their heads, for goodness sake. But people do it, right? Because people don't want to add up the numbers.
Sure.
Eric, where's your limit to pull out a calculator?
If we're talking more than like 150, and if it's a lot of little small numbers, I'll often, just so I don't miss it, like Earth. We played a game of Earth the other day, and those scores are pretty high, and I like to pull out the calculator for those. What
about you, Andrew?
Well, I don't know. I was trained on Yahtzee, so we hit, post, we're upward of 200, on a good game. So I'm used to pencil and paper, adding that sort of stuff up. No calculator needed, but and I think I probably maybe been spoiled by just lots of games with victory point trackers along the edges of the board. So I don't find myself adding a lot, but I don't mind. I don't mind counting up stuff either, but it always makes me wonder. There's a little fruit stand near here, a great fruit stand called Robert Is Here, and those guys always, whenever you buy stuff, they write it all down and add it up instead of using a cash register, and I'm always a little bugged because the kid looks sometimes like they're 18, and I'm like, but what if you got it wrong? I feel like maybe we should just round all the prices to like $5 each. Makes life easier, but they're also all like $1.95, and it always just bugs me just a little bit because I wonder if they're good at math.
I think they have a lot of practice. I've seen the lines at this place.
Yeah, I know, but that doesn't mean errors don't happen.
True.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, this has been a blast. It's been really nice to talk to you. For folks who want to know more about your Smoking Bones universe, your other projects, where do they go?
Well, I'm not on social media, active on social
Smart
media anymore. I have a newsletter through my website that is where the big information usually goes out. But I have a Discord channel for Wits End Studios, so Wits End on Discord if people look for that, and I have a Patreon as well, and we have a really neat community there where we're just chatting. I do live streams of me painting. I share a lot of art through those mediums, and even give away some original art on a monthly basis. So the non-digital stuff. But yeah, that's through those you can either, as far as deep as you want to go. The newsletter is a great way to just kind of get the big picture idea of where things are coming, the new projects for my clients, new development in Smoking Bones, but then the Discord or the Patreon is a way to really kind of get an inside peek at stuff here in my office. So.
Alrighty, folks. Well, that's that. Thank you, Andrew, for coming on. And until next time, I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Eric Summerer.
Thank you, guys.
I have to keep looking at the script here. We will see you soon at the Dice Tower table. At the table.
Thank you for joining us today. No live show in 2 weeks due to the Spring Spectacular, but we might have a surprise or two in store before we see you again. At the Table is produced by Tom and me with assistance from Roy Canada, Wendy Yee, and Chris Yee. Watching as your friend combo chains to victory in Terraforming Mars, provided by Endless Wind Turn. Our theme is written by Timothy Pinkham, arranged by Dave Culling, and support for everything at the Dice Tower comes from viewers and listeners like you. Reach out to us on Facebook or Twitter, or to Tom@Dicetower.com or Eric@Dicetower.com. Until we see you again, from all of us at the table, have fun gaming.
That was terrible.